Welcome, everybody. It is 12:30, so we are going to go ahead and get started. First, thanks for joining us today for our Brown Bag webinar. This is Christina Titus from the National Convergence Technology Center, welcoming you to today's presentation of NetLab Virtualization, providing labs anywhere and anytime. Okay. So now a little about our presenter today, Bill Saichek. Bill has been a part of the National Convergence Technology Center for over 15 years as a CCN member, partner, presenter, curriculum developer, and instructor. He has worked closely with NetLab for over 10 years, installing the infrastructure and authoring curriculum. He has created many custom labs and pods for various topics in IT and cybersecurity. Please note that Bill will be teaching a track on the same topic at Winter Working Connections, which runs online December 12th through the 14th. Registration is open now. We'll put the sign-up link in the chat box in just a moment. Thanks, Bill, for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And first and foremost, I want to thank Ann Beheeler and Christina and Mark and everybody at the Convergence Technology Center for the opportunity to, do this short presentation this afternoon. So before I begin, can I see a show of hands or some other indication? How many of you, your colleges, your schools already have and are using NetLab? Well, good. So we have some NetLab users already out there, but what I really like to see is that there's a lot of other folks that their colleges haven't considered the NetLab environment yet. And hopefully maybe after today's little short session, you may want to consider looking into bringing it onto your campus. So a quick elevator speech, meaning I'm not going to spend a lot of time on going over what is NetLab as far as all the marketing stuff and all of that. But simply put, NetLab is a remote access solution. It's basically a virtualization environment with a really good database scheduling engine in front of it that allows your institutions, colleges, even high schools, universities, to be able to provide IT labs, both in a virtual environment as well as a physical hardware. There are physical hardware labs that have been developed primarily in the Cisco curriculum, the Cisco CCNA curriculum, but that is always expandable and changeable. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The beauty of NetLab is you can provide very, very complex, detailed labs without having to have students come to campus and work in labs. And that has been a real important improvement over the past 2 years. And we've seen an incredible growth in remote learning in this case. Now, I do know many schools, myself included, who use NetLab in the classroom or in the lab itself. If you have access to computers in your lab, you can do it at the same time. So simply having NetLab doesn't preclude you from running on-campus labs as well. It just provides a flexibility so that students can schedule their own labs at times that are convenient for them. So if you're familiar with if you're familiar with any virtualization, but VMware in particular, NetLab is simply a leveraging of the environment, of the VMware environment. Again, it provides a cohesive solution with databases to manage courses, students, and there's even the ability of tracking logs. So you can actually track, are students using it? Are they getting their labs done? And are able to work together. So it's a really cool environment when you're trying to manage either very large classes of IT students and or managing them in a online remote environment. So it really helps. If you look at the environment, it's a very simple, straightforward environment. You typically have your campus network on kind of the inside. You typically have a firewall. Your IT department sets up a firewall, although that's not 100% required to have it between the campus LAN and the NetLab infrastructure. But once you're in the NetLab infrastructure, you can see that in the lower part, that is a completely sandboxed environment. There is no direct internet access by any of the pods, which means your students can do all kinds of really cool things. Cybersecurity was always a challenge to do. I remember doing cybersecurity before it was called that 15 or more years ago. And we were always panicked. How do we teach students how to do, whether it be network security, forensics, ethical hacking on equipment that has some connection to the campus? So you'd either have to completely air gap it, which meant it was more difficult to administer. This takes care of all of that. So it's a really, really simple environment to set up and use. So assuming you're interested in a NetLab world, and for those of you that have it, but may not be entirely familiar with what's going on in the back end, here's what it basically involves. And it's real simple. You require several servers. Now, the servers are rather beefy. Currently, we're looking at Lenovo, but there are configurations, and I have set up and I've installed under Dell and even under server environments that are not that. Now, it's a little more difficult if you get away from Lenovo and Dell, but it's very doable. So you need one server that's called the management server. That's what hosts the VMware vCenter and vSphere environment. And it also performs the action of maintaining the NetLab environment itself. So NetLab has now been completely virtualized. You used to have a dedicated NetLab server, but now no longer, which means there's a ton more flexibility. There's other things you can throw out there, and I've done that in many of the environments that I have configured. You can set up a VPN server if you want to be able to have some administrative access from off campus. You can set up jump boxes, again, to make management a little bit easier. Then you need one or more host servers. These are the servers that actually host the NetLab pods. And you can start as small as one server, and it does have to be fairly beefy in terms of memory. Minimum memory required on a server is about 256 gigabytes. Most servers are about 384, and some go even a little higher than that. That allows you to support a large number of simultaneous active pods. Now, you can have as many pods created, but there's a limit on how many pods can be run at any one time. And that's part of it is resources, part of that is licensing with NDG. You can use real hardware. Currently, the main real hardware that is supported are Cisco equipment, Cisco routers, switches, ASA firewalls, and the like. And they're primarily used for CCNA, CCNP type courses, but there's always the possibility, well, NDG is exploring the ability to expand out to more real hardware. And of course, when we get to custom labs, those are doable. I know they're doable because I've done it in my own labs in the Internet of Things. You also need your infrastructure support. You need racks, UPSs, all of your cabling, all of your cable management, and so on and so forth. And of course, you need an internet connection that is supplied by your college, by your institution, that can support the remote access. Now, that usually requires some technical, but it much more requires some consulting with IT. Getting IT involved very early in your NetLab installation or configuration works wonders as you move forward. Very busy slide. I apologize to some extent, but I wanted to use this slide as a way of showing you kind of what the interactive structure is between all of the things in NetLab. One of the issues that when I'm going out and I'm doing installations and training in the NetLab world is trying to piece together all of these individual pieces and how they work together. And they do work together very well. So I'm just going to very briefly kind of go over it. And I'm going to simply mention that you usually have content. We always start with certain content. Now, most of the content that you would be using will be supplied by NDG. And that is included, any and all packages, any and all content is included with your NetLab license. The only limitation is certain vendor-specific content, such as, for example, Palo Alto, Cisco, and some of the Microsoft requires that you be a member of their academy in order to have access to the content. That's not an NDG requirement. Well, it is sort of an NDG requirement, but it's because the vendors require that of NDG. And most of you are probably in those environments. So if you have any of those backgrounds or are considering it, you get the content automatically once you're authorized. There's lots of content that is not vendor restricted. So there's all kinds of content. There's a lot of CompTIA content out there. There is some Cisco content that is not necessarily behind the Academy moniker in that respect. There's Linux and all kinds of stuff like that, as well as your own custom information, custom that we'll talk about in a minute. And so what you see in the far left is just big boxes containing, these are some examples, and this is not any kind of a complete list. It's a very small list just based on what I could fit on a page and still be readable. But you can see within each content box, there are a number of virtual machines. That means this is what makes up a pod. So a pod is made up of a content and then a bunch of virtual machines that will be supporting that content. Once you build your master, in other words, you build, here's what I want it to look like, then you can build as many clones. And cloning is a matter of minutes. So you could clone 1 to dozens of VM pods that students can use. Then obviously when you move over to the other side, the far right side, you'd have your instructors and students accounts. Those accounts are not directly translatable through something like LDAP. So if you have like an Active Directory environment, you would have to do an export import, which is okay. Then you set up your classes, and the classes can be set up by instructors or they can be set up by administrators. Students are added to those classes. Classes will have relationship to content. So you take content and put it in a class. So as you can see from some of them, like in the bottom, I have Security Plus version 4, Ethical Hacking, and the CYSA Plus. Those are 3 cybersecurity content labs, but notice I'm scattering them over a number of different cybersecurity classes. So you have a lot of flexibility built into that as we go along. So NetLab has just a ton of content. We talked about that, and a lot of it, not all, because there's a lot beyond that. Aligns with industry certifications. That was, in fact, the initial push. I remember, and Anne remembers this one, is going way, way, way back in time, before NetLab became virtualization centric. Their main goal, in fact, the only real content they supported was the Cisco CCNA content, so that students could access real Cisco hardware from outside, and they could have access 24/7. And that simply exploded. Once that turned out to be a great idea, other vendors wanted to be a part of it. So obviously, Cisco is still a big, big part of NDG and NetLab. You know, they support IT Essentials, CCNA routing and switching, security and cyber ops, CCNP Enterprise, and now they even manage DevNet. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see within the networking world, they have a whole bunch of content. Red Hat is supported as a vendor, and they have according labs that have actually been vetted by Red Hat or by Red Hat. In cybersecurity, so you have cybersecurity supported by CompTIA. There's also from other places, CEH, Certified Ethical Hacker is supported in their ethical hacking and forensics courses. Palo Alto is a big up and coming environment. Palo Alto is hugely in demand by the industry, but it's been very difficult for colleges to be able to supply not just the labs, because the labs are supplied by Palo Alto, but an environment to run the labs. And again, that is provided as part of NetLab. VMware is another huge, seems kind of very symbiotic there, where you have a huge VMware environment running a VMware environment classroom. So we're actually playing multiple depths, multiple layers of virtualization, which is a lot of fun to set up and teach. And then, of course, there are several operating systems as well, Linux Plus and Windows 10. So here's a question, and in kind of like the late night advertising that you see on television, but wait, there's more. So simply put, there's a lot of times I experience this in my classes. I'm teaching classes that are not necessarily ones that would be popular enough to benefit from NDG's, investing in developing labs, but like in the areas of Internet of Things, in the areas of programming, and there's also some other areas where there's some licensing issues where NDG would not be allowed to provide the virtualization. They can provide the framework, but somebody else would have to provide the licensed lab. So if you have these labs and you'd like them to be usable by students 24/7, we have the answer. And that's custom labs and pods. So without, again, a little bit of a busy screen, I apologize for that, but I wanted to, again, kind of give you a flavor of what is involved with building custom labs and the custom pods. And you can see it's a very simple process. It's very straightforward. There is some time-consuming aspects of it, and there's a lot of design and a lot of stuff going on in the background. But I can tell you this, as an instructor, and having been one for many, many years, just the development of these kind of labs is really cool. You probably have the labs. Building it into NetLab may be very simple, very straightforward. And you can add as many custom labs and custom pods as you would like. Again, you are going to be under limitations, licensing and resource limitations, as to how many of these labs can be run simultaneously. But they can always be loaded on the servers and run. So, for example, I've written a number of custom labs that are not, you don't use any physical machine for my Internet of Things class. And also, I'm looking to perhaps break that fourth wall and do allow network, not necessarily internet access, but allow access to physical hardware beyond Cisco. So this could be things like physical Raspberry Pis, plus sensors and actuators as well, all kinds of stuff. One other quick thing, and I'll basically finish up, is that the labs are extremely flexible and extremely usable. And one more thing, I actually almost forgot this. If you've developed a lab that's really cool, and other faculty, either within your college, but more importantly, outside other places, you can share labs. There's an easy way to export your pod designs, your lab designs to other people, to other colleges, and they can in fact implement them. The labs I developed in my IoT course, I developed at Orange Coast College. When I began teaching at San Jose State University, I just simply exported my labs, sent them up to the San Jose NetLab administrator. They loaded the pods, they set them up, and I was off and running. And I see some questions, and I'll get to those in just a second. So the last bullet point is like the biggie. If you're interested in learning about custom labs and custom pods, there will be the winter working connections online using NetLab from December 12th through the 14th. And I highly recommend, even if your organization is not NetLab centric, does not have a NetLab at this point, it still may be worthwhile, because there are many places where schools will provide, let's say you have a neighbor school, a sister school, another college that you'd like to work with, or a high school, for example. You can easily leverage your NetLab for their use as well. In fact, Northern California did this with about 10 of their colleges. And it's been a real good thing to do. So again, consider attending. All right, so last and not least, NetLab is a robust environment that allows expansion of your course content, and this can go beyond your classroom. Quick aside, kind of as a parenthetical, you're not limited to IT. You could develop pods in other areas of IT, computer science, engineering, etc., by just building the appropriate custom labs. So there is a NetLab environment provided by the CTC, and Christina and Mark can give you more information about that. So if you wanted your college to kind of dip the toe in the water, so to speak, we have a solution for that as well. And I've put Mark's information. Most of you know how to reach Mark and or Christina, and they can, of course, help you set up that NetLab.